This past month, I challenged myself to sew 1 hour for every day, and today I'm sharing with you what I learned from that process. As I said, the goal was sewing 1 hour every day with the purpose of testing whether this was a better, more productive schedule for my sewing than how I typically go about it. If it's a bigger project or a series of thrift flips, especially when it's for a video, I can sometimes end up spending 8 to 10 hours out of the day sewing and really burning myself out. So I wanted to test out a different schedule, a limited but consistent schedule, making myself sew a little bit every day just to see if that would be healthier and more productive. The rules for this project were as follows. I must sew for 1 hour every day for the next 30 days. If for some reason that is not feasible on any given day, I can add a half hour to the 2 following days to make up that time. I wanted to have a plan in place for unforeseeable changes to my schedule or sick days, but also not allow myself to go too far past the 1 hour time limit. The timer is to be treated like the bell ringing in school. I must quickly wrap up whatever stitch or step I am working on, but I don't have to drop things immediately that second like a hot potato. There is a grace period of a few minutes. The projects completed for this project will be kept separate from other projects and will not be worked on outside of the 1 hour time blocks to keep an accurate idea of how much I make. And lastly, I will only make items from scratch and I will not be including alterations of existing items. Repurposing fabric is allowed as long as it is used to build an entirely new item from scratch. So those were my rules and stipulations for myself, but let's talk about what actually happened and how I actually feel about this now that it's all said and done. The first takeaway, the first thing to note is that things just take longer than you think they will, especially for me, and especially if I'm really taking the time and putting in the care to do it right and to do it well. But also when you break things down hour by hour and step by step, you just realize how much goes into everything. And I think really breaking it down hour by hour really put that in high definition for me. And I find it can be sometimes hard for me to adequately estimate just how long something will take. I'm getting better at it. An experiment like this, I think, helped with that, breaking it down by how many hours it took me to complete a project, but it still can be hard for me to estimate how long something will take. No matter how much time you estimate it'll take to work on it, be prepared to add on to that, especially if that means it's going to be done well. It is day 8. Yeah. It's Wednesday again, so it's been a full week. It's day 8. I am so close to being done with this stupid apron, and it's driving me nuts how much longer it takes to do things. Like, this is such a basic garment, and normally I would have knocked this out within probably 3 days, if not less, just sewing in larger chunks of time. But making myself do it 1 hour at a time is really helping give more perspective on how long it actually takes to complete different tasks, for me at least. So far, the most frustrating thing has been like when I'm so close to what I consider a good stopping point, but the timer goes off. So I just have to finish whatever thing I'm actually doing at that moment, you know, whether it's pressing something or just finishing a stitch. I can't like finish the whole step. I do still feel like I'm making good progress. So in the first week, I finished one little headscarf. Then I moved on to the apron. Once I'm done this apron, I have a couple curtains that I kept for the fabric and I want to make a beach tote. I meant to do it this summer and didn't have time, so now's the perfect opportunity. My second takeaway was that motivation is not enough because my motivation was often at odds with the schedule. I'm so unmotivated to sew today, but let's do this. I think I started off this project super motivated, super excited, the way I start off any project, really. But then inevitably days come up where I just have lower energy, I have other things on my mind, or I just don't feel like it, but it still needs to get done. And I think it goes without saying that that applies to many things in life, not just our creative hobbies. But it is kind of funny to notice that in yourself, not just for like doing the dishes or things around the house that you're like, obviously I'm not motivated to do that, it just has to get done. But even with something that I love doing and feel typically very motivated to do. I only have like 7 minutes left, which is not going to be enough to finish this tonight, so I'm going to start planning my next project. So one thing that definitely did help was going into it with the mindset of, it doesn't matter if I feel like doing it, I'm going to do it. It's on the schedule, I'm going to do it. And it definitely did help that I have a very nice space set up to do that. I think it would have been much harder for me if I did not have a designated room in which I do my sewing. Basically, I have set up my life in a way and set up my environment in a way that makes it as easy as possible for me to do my sewing. But even despite that, there were still days when I just didn't feel like it. And that's normal. That's normal for anything that you want to do, and sometimes you just have to push through it. And usually what I would find is that that initial hump of like just getting to it, just starting, was the hardest. Once I was 10-15 minutes into that hour, I was fine. I was fine, and sometimes even frustrated that the hour ended because I was like, wait, no, I want to do more. It's day 15, just going into the third week of this project. I am almost done with my third item, this like beach tote bag. I have a confession though. So a couple nights ago, when I was attaching the front and back pieces to the sides, it got not really, but it got a little messed up when I was serging those edges, and it was just bunched in the corners in a way that I could not stand. And I had about 15 minutes left of my hour of sewing when I realized this. And I was kind of at a crossroads. I could have kept going and just left the serging wonky looking and just moved on to the next step. But I know myself enough to know that I would not be happy with that down the road and that I would want to redo it. So I decided to undo, like cut apart basically the entire thing as it were, and start over with putting the pieces together. But the thing is, I could not wait until the following day and my next allotted hour, because I also needed to do some sewing that same night that required a different color thread on my serger. And if you know, you know that changing the thread on a serging machine is such a pain in the butt. Like, it's not the biggest deal, but I don't know, I really hate it. I find it incredibly tedious. The same way that I find brushing my teeth twice a day incredibly tedious. Do I still do it? Yes, but I don't like it. And so in order to avoid changing the serging thread twice, I took a little break to clear my head about my frustration over the edges looking too wonky for my liking. And then I did another 45 minutes on this project. So about an hour 45, give or take, in one day, which is more than I am supposed to do. Now, those hours were broken up. I didn't just consecutively run through, but I gave in to the desire to keep working on something and make it right. And I was able to. The question is now, where do I take away that time elsewhere in the month? I think I will just take away those 45 minutes from this weekend. Yeah. There was a part of me that like didn't want to bring it up at all, but this is a part of the process of this challenge, is noticing how it affects me mentally and my ability to get work done, if it's useful or not useful. And in this particular case, that hour limit was not useful. But yeah, that's my confession. That's what I did. Onwards from here, I guess. I'm gonna finish up this bag, and then I think I want to try moving on to something a little bit more complicated, because so far I've done pretty straightforward, simple pieces. My third takeaway is that doing the next step is sometimes more useful than working a set amount of time like an hour, but also working for a set amount of time like an hour is more useful than working randomly. So as I was going through this process over and over again, I would find myself getting to the end of that hour and feeling like, man, I wish I just had 20 or 30 more minutes to get to a place that I feel like is a good stopping point. It's done. It's done. Or I was just really in the groove of things and feeling motivated to keep working, but the hour was up, so I had to wrap up whatever stitch I was on. So while doing a designated amount of time towards a project obviously is better than just working in random spurts when you think you can try to maybe find the time and motivation, I often found that the time limit on that schedule was at odds with my natural workflow. Because again, setting that hour on my schedule of I'm doing it whether I want to or not was very helpful to just get into the mode of getting it done. But once I was in that workflow, it was then frustrating to cut it off. Focusing on tackling the next step rather than scheduling an hour precisely to work on a project would be more helpful for me personally in how my mind works when I'm working on a sewing project. Okay, this is a really weird angle to be filming from, but I don't know, I'm changing it up a bit, I guess. So we are into the final week of this project, and since I last did a check-in, I have had 2 missed days that I had to then make up by splitting the time onto other days. I ended up just not having time at all to do my sewing. Technically I had time, but it was one of those things where I was like, I need to listen to my body and go to bed. So I did that. And it was kind of surprising to me because up until this past week, I felt like I was doing really good about keeping up on this. I guess things just got busy and my motivation overall has just been kind of dwindling. And I think part of that is just because the next project that I chose to work on isn't something that I feel super strongly about. It's something that I've wanted to add to my wardrobe and can't find a decent one secondhand or firsthand. So I was kind of like, well, guess I'll just make it myself. So it's a thing that I want and I think I will wear, but it's not exciting. I have managed to have pockets and a side zip in the same garment and I feel quite accomplished about that. I mean, my seams around the zipper are a little bit crooked, but they're not wrong. They're just a little funky looking. It's perfectly fine. It's just not that exciting. So I don't know, that might be adding to my lack of motivation. Been a little bit sick this past week as well. I don't know if that's just like a natural thing getting to this point in the process, being basically in the home stretch. So I think probably the last thing I'll have time for is this pair of shorts. I made myself a pair of shorts with this fabric a couple years ago and I've been meaning to make my husband a matching pair and I just haven't gotten around to it. So this is, again, something that I'm not that excited about, but I've been meaning to make it. So might as well use this time to knock out those things. At this point though, I am feeling like I just want to not touch my sewing machine for like 2 days in a row. And not like I don't want to look at this for like a month. I just want like a couple days. My fourth takeaway is that intentional breaks, taking time away from your creative project, is good and necessary. I ended up having to take a couple unintentional breaks on days that I just could not fit the hour into my schedule, even though it was on my schedule. Work and family and other things came up that are more important than my sewing project, let's be real. And so I had to take an unintentional break away from them. But about halfway through this process, I just kept feeling like, man, I really want to not look at my sewing machine for a couple days in a row. Although chipping away at a project a little bit every day obviously is great for just building the habit and getting work done and really seeing progress, I so badly wanted to take breaks away from this because I realized for me, taking a few days away from whatever I'm working on is actually really good space to reflect on what I've done so far and think about what I want to do next. Because if I'm just going back to it every day and chipping away at it, you don't get that space to reflect and just take your mind off of it for a little bit. And so when I had those unintentional breaks where I accidentally missed a day, I did not have that reflective space away from it. I did not come back to it feeling refreshed and energized to work on it again. It was like, oh crap, I missed a day, so I better make up this time. So at least with my sewing projects, as much as I love sewing, obviously, and I have so many things that I want to work on and get done, I still need to build in those breaks away from those projects just to let my mind rest and feel excited to come back to it. My final takeaway from this process is something I've said before in a recent short that I posted. Done is better than perfect. I have had it up to here with that stupid black mini skirt. Ultimately, it is finished in a way that I can be okay with, but I just was going back and forth trying to fix it and make it fit the way that I wanted. And it's like 90% there. It fits fine, but it really was driving me nuts that I couldn't make it exactly what I wanted. At some point, I just had to admit to myself that no amount of tweaking and reshaping this thing was going to make it exactly 100% what I wanted. So could I be okay with having it 90% how I wanted? It just was getting unhealthy to fixate on fixing this skirt, and I have other things that I want to do. So at the end of all of this, was it worth it? Absolutely, I think so. I feel quite accomplished with how much I was able to create in a month. I feel like I got a lot done, and there are things that I've been meaning to do and just putting off. I do think this was worth it. That being said, I definitely would tweak how I would go about this in the future. I think what I am more likely to do is try to set up my schedule in such a way that I have at least an hour to work on things every day, but obviously not stopping myself at an hour because, like I said, I usually needed like just a half hour more to finish whatever step I was on. I think if I try to build this into my schedule in a way where it's completing the next step of something, that will be more beneficial for me and my workflow and how I get things done, or building in 2 or 3 hours at a time, because that is more of a typical work block for me when it comes to things like this. Additionally, intentionally taking breaks away from my projects. That might be taking the weekend off. That might be intentionally ahead of time, deciding to take off days that I'm just really busy with other things. But I very much would recommend trying to build into your schedule. Carve out just an hour, a half hour to chip away at those projects that you've been trying to get done. Maybe that's a half hour in the evenings after you get home from work. Maybe that's 1 hour, 2 days on your weekend. And progress might look slow, but you will notice things getting done if you intentionally set aside that time for it. Now, if only I could get myself to do the same thing with exercise. And that's the thing, I realize like this does not just apply to sewing. This applies to so many other things in my life that I have struggled to build consistent good habits with. The difference here being sewing is something that I already enjoy, already feel drawn to do, motivated to do. I have it set up so that it is easy for me to engage with it. So now I just need to do the same with those other habits that I just have not been very self-disciplined about. Let me know if you're going to try a variation of this for yourself. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave a mouse emoji down in the comments because I found a couple mouse poopies on my desk when I walked in here today. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you would like to hang out again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.